what trends and trajectories in family photography were you able to sort of trace in your conversations with people? And were there any commonalities or differences that you saw emerge through these encounters, especially as they've been so wide-ranging and sort of leading one into the other?
Of course, as widely understood, many family albums tend to be kind of constructed, idealized families with mostly happy occasions such as births, weddings, special occasions, holidays, etc. Also, traditionally, as you see, most archives which are not been which are commonly seen tend to come from more privileged sections of society. So we try to avoid those trends to begin with, not that we and try to look at it from that perspective. But we found that is usually kind of in our interactions, that is usually a memory keeper in these families, and almost always that memory keeper of these family pictures and memorabilia is a woman. We also met people who, even though had these old pictures, didn't like looking at the old pictures and preferred to live in the moment because the pictures were too hard to look at. And kind of the act of remembering, I think remembering comes back again, in itself is not always perfect. In one of our interviews, we spoke to Antoinette Fernandez, who suffers from dementia. So her memories came in sort of fits and bursts, and she was slowly compelled by these sort of old photographs and sort of sometimes prompted by her son Marias. And in some photographs, they triggered almost perfect recollections, and in others, the people at the edges grew fuzzy, which I thought was like a perfect metaphor for sort of archives and for and this entire exercise, because that exercise has repeated itself. Even people with almost perfect memory, there are always people at the edges who became kind of fuzzy, and usually the sort of talking and looking happened side by side.
Yeah, I think very much so. And I think that along the way we have had also very interesting interactions uh, with ideas of community, class, religion, segregations, these layers, simple things like someone's name, actually, which will not mean anything to anyone else across India, but in Goa, it is so important understand how a D'Souza is written, or a Matias is written, or a Fernandez is written, and entire family histories linked with these, these small things that sort of play in the background. So definitely, I think in terms of looking at access to photography itself, we do know that a more privileged class would have access to it. And, we've been told by people that even though we have really tried to talk to a diversity of people across sections in Goa, the Christians, the Hindus, the Muslims, um, we've tried our best, but we've received comments like, you don't have somebody of the in these sections or in the rural areas or from these tribal communities, and we just have to say that this is one of the difficulties, because for photography did come with a certain wealth and a certain privilege and a certain access. The use of studios and the fascination for, let's say, recording an event like a wedding within a studio space or a family image in a studio was something that came along with other privileges. So these were also the additional kinds of complexities that we were coming across. But again, to return to what I was mentioning in the beginning, we really attempted not to try and validate, or not to try and balance anything out, but just accept everything as it was, and put it in as simple way as possible. And like Akshay said, I think it's not just something singularly standing on its own. The oral histories, the photographs, the families, their interconnections, their connections with the wider landscape and growth of Goa as a state and a city, Ponji as a city, Mapsa as a city, Margao as a city, everything really sort of bleeds into these ideas that we were trying to bring together.
Yeah, and I think also that's where I think we chose to privilege the oral history over the photograph sometimes, because some people have large collections of photographs, and usually, even though I'm a photographer and we are an archivist in this particular case, it would be natural for us to privilege a large collection of photographs. But to sidestep that, we sometimes privilege the oral history, because oral history became a kind of made it a level playing field. So even if you had not many photographs, just one or two, they could still tell a very poignant story.
We have been, in fact, talking about working in a very local way, because Goa is like this, it's like this map of interconnected communities. Each village almost has its own deep history. Each family's ancestry has different connections to, let's say, Kenya or Canada or UK or Australia. And there are these wonderful networks of histories that come from a single village. And so we were, in fact, because of our engagement with certain spaces, we were considering going deeper into building a sort of larger community history through these histories of the albums themselves. And I think that we would really like to extend our web page and perhaps even work towards another series of small pop-up exhibitions that are fed entirely by community interaction and nothing else. So it's a sort of shifting idea of the archive itself, in terms of engagement and what people are also feeling comfortable with, considering this entire period that we're living through.
Great interest in these localized histories. And one of the things we were talking about, experimenting with, I think with Marias Fernandez, who's from the island of Devar, was to do kind of a localized event where we take some of the methodologies that we have developed, which is the oral history tellings, right? Which is somebody looking through and talking about their album, and make that into kind of a symposium where people from the village come and show photographs from the albums to other folk in this thing, and it makes it kind of like an interactive closed space. But we were thinking of ways and means to localize these engagements, because sometimes what happens is that these engagements may move from that space in that village into a very exclusive space, and then they lose touch with the entire initial point. So like you said, there are lots of things that we can do, that we are interested in doing with these things, which further look at the local seed of these things. And then Goa is a fantastic place to do that because of its geography, because it's only 100 square kilometers and this sort of closed thing. But at the same time, all these various linkages and its sort of unique sort of bubble that it was in history for this divergent part that it took for 400 years. So it's like an interesting space to look at.
Your personal engagements with photography are both quite varied, as you work with different aspects of the medium. So do you see that do you find that your individual practices as a photographer and as a curator historian supplement the project and its objectives? Are there, do you find that in certain conversations or aspects, there are things that intrigue you, either of you personally, seeing as how you both are, you occupy very different spaces in the project?
Obviously, I think I definitely have generally a love for the photograph, and especially and I think it's any sort of vernacular practice, because I think as a photographer, especially in this sort of contemporary space, we tend to pedestalize Western practice, and the family photograph and the family album is and its history is the history of photography in the subcontinent. it is a truly subcontinental or South Asian form, and in various ways unique, and yet similar to practices in sort of colonial world, whether you look at practices in Africa or in Asia or other parts of Asia. So definitely that's something I always was attracted to and looking at, because the act of seeing photographs is what reading them is always exciting to me. So that perspective is always interesting, but also because a lot of my photography is social documentary, has elements of that. So the idea of talking to people and conversations about themselves, and this entire thing was also very attractive. So I don't those key areas, but I think those are also common with Lina's interests. So I don't know, maybe I don't know what things I took in as a photographer, other than just a sort of general passion for it. But yeah.
I think that it's been lucky in the sense that we really connected in many spaces with these common uh, ideas about heritage, about oral histories, about talking to people, let's say, and these were the common spaces that allowed us to very organically develop these different methodologies within the Goa Familiar project. For me, I think as an art historian, the physicality of things is also something that is very crucial, because I do work a lot with material culture, and of course, actually, Akshay, in your project with the Goa Photo,
Right.
it was also so much about building these archival understandings through personal memory and objects and architecture and everything. So, definitely the idea of material culture is something central, which came across in our exhibition as well, the, work in progress exhibition that we did. And these ideas of oral histories being pathways into understanding our own history better,
Hmm.
and allow for this interaction between documented histories and fiction as well, to be able to have that space to imagine things differently from what they are expected to be. These are the sort of spaces that have really taught me a lot also in understanding these things. And I have to say that I learned a lot about the technological and the historical aspects of photography itself a lot from Akshay and the other couple of people who were part of our team. Something that was not one of my strengths because of having a limited interaction with it. But now with this project, I think it's been a huge amount of learning. And I think that we really have learned a lot also about these very underground practices, rituals, sometimes even shamanistic understanding of certain things in the Goan region, which are entirely different from, let's say, other parts. So there have been there have been really revelations during this project, and we really hope to be able to continue and keep building this project more.
Right. Thank you so much, both of you. This was a wonderful conversation. And
Thank you
I'm
so
truly,
much,
truly
Anish.
grateful for taking out time to have this conversation with me.